What do you believe right now that's making you feel this way? And when you analyse it, you realise how irrational you can be at times.
Every single one of our major customers and minor customers all shut their doors overnight.
It's not sales per se, but the outcome of it is, because people get to know you, they get to see you.
But, what's the culture like at the business? What do we stand for, the values?
I've got to tick that box on my personal development programme I don't really want to be here.
Scaling up a business isn't easy. If it were, we wouldn't have less than 4% of businesses scaling beyond 10 employees or around £1 million turnover level, and less than 1% beyond 50 employees. But the contribution that we make as owner-managers to our economies is immense and should never be underestimated, yet it can be a tough gig for all of us at times, and only other business owners truly understand the challenges that we face. And through ScaleUp Radio, we aim to help make things a little easier. We interview guests who have been where you are now and may have faced some of the challenges that you are facing. And they offer their thoughts and advice on what has worked for them, as well as what didn't. And we've also combined many of the lessons from these interviews, and also through working with hundreds of owner managers over the last 10 years or so, into a practical scale-up handbook that we've called the Entrepreneurial Scale-Up System, or ESUS. And it's for owner managers like you and me as we navigate our own scale-up journey. And you can order a copy through your favourite online book retailer, or by going to all the W's, esusgroup.co.uk, www.esusgroup.co.uk. Today on ScaleUp Radio, I interviewed Jack Deverson, who's the MD and co-founder of Evidence-Based Education, or EBE. And Jack co-founded the business with Stewart around 7 or so years ago. And they started in the field of education through teacher training and education consultancy. They started through in-person workshops, and they've evolved over time to be a much more scalable business, and they've won multiple awards for their innovative approach now to their online learning offer and subscription service called the Great Teaching Toolkit, including a Queen's Award for Enterprise. So some really great success already. One of the challenges in this kind of world is establishing credibility in the education industry, and I'd like you to listen out to a couple of the clever ways that Jack and Stuart have gone about building that credibility. And they're now up to around 16 employees. They've had around 27,000 teachers go through their services. And there's a lot to be learned from Jack and the way that he's approached the scaling of his business so far, regardless of what sector or industry you might be in. So certainly encourage you to take a listen to the rest of Jack's story. Welcome to another episode of ScaleUp Radio. Today, I have the pleasure of having Jack Deverson with me, who is the MD and co-founder of Evidence-Based Education, or EBE for short. So Jack, welcome to ScaleUp Radio.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be on.
Oh, fantastic. So Evidence-Based Education, or EBE, what's that all about?
Yeah, so, long story short, we work with teachers, we work with schools, and our sort of ultimate aim is to help them provide a better quality of education to the kids in their care, really. And we do that through we've done that through many different ways over the sort of 7 or 8 years of our journey so far. By and large, it's teacher training, education consultancy, and more recently, we've developed a few ed tech solutions for schools as well. So yeah, many and varied.
So lots of, and is it any particular types of schools?
We work with all types of schools, really, from primary, from age sort of 5, 6, all the way up to sixth form and post 16 education. It's generally anyone who's interested in teaching and instruction. We work with them.
Great, and we'll get into the details of the business in a moment and some of your journey. But you've been going for 7 or 8 years, as you said. And I believe you've won all sorts of awards. I know for a fact that you won the Young Entrepreneur in your region at the Great British Entrepreneur Awards. Can you give us some other idea of the sort of stage that the business is at?
Yeah, so I mean, the awards. I'm consistently surprised when we get nominated and end up winning these things. But so I guess the first thing that sort of really kicked us on to the next level a little bit was we won the Queen's Award for Enterprise, as was in 2019 in the innovation category.
Wow.
And that was for sort of I guess we were sort of zigging when other people were zagging in teacher education, and we sort of moved online before COVID, and that was maybe a bit of a brave move because online learning had a bit of a bad rap. But we kind of realised that our time was the barrier to scaling, and when you've got to sort of travel here, there, and everywhere between schools, it's more consultancy than sort of scalable training and ed tech. So that was kind of that was the first one, and then as you said, that sort of our sort of continued growth and development has culminated in that in November at the Great British Entrepreneur Awards, which was as I say, a real shock to me, but lovely sort of recognition, not just for my work, but for the team as much as anything, really.
Brilliant. So how big is the team now?
So we've got 16 now, mostly in the northeast of England at our office, and then a couple. We've got one in Greece who used to live in the northeast and then rejoined us when she moved back to Greece, and then we've got one team member in the sort of Birmingham area. So yeah, we're sort of spreading our wings. Brilliant.
And of course, because you're working online, they can essentially work from anywhere, can they?
Yeah, they can. Yeah. I guess a lot of businesses will have gone through this, particularly in the last couple of years, but
yeah.
It really widened our pool of sort of potential people we could work with, but at the same time we really appreciate the value of kind of getting everyone together. So we do try and keep doing that sort of periodically to keep people sort of chatting and galvanized.
Good. And are they full time or are they on an associate type basis?
Yeah, vast majority employed full time. We've got a couple of part time, sort of 3 or 4 days a week. But yeah, vast majority. We've just kind of built the team steadily over time, really, as we've gone.
And how many schools are you working with? What sort of number of establishments?
So, well, we can. I guess we'll talk a little bit more about our sort of main product offering. That's the Great Teaching Toolkit. We've got so there's about 14,000 teachers on the Great Teaching Toolkit. And then on our sort of courses that predate that development, there's another 12 or 13,000 on there. So there's about 27,000 teachers, and it's probably about 1,500 schools now, I think.
Wow, that sounds like really impressive numbers.
It's hopefully people like what we do, and I think it's a paid service for schools, and I'm acutely aware of that. But that also means people vote with their feet. So the fact that people continue to engage with our work is a really positive sign for me.
So tell me about that then. So what is it that makes you different, and what is how do you make the money? How does the cash flow?
Yeah, so knowing that schools' budgets are really challenging, lots of people will have read lots about this, I'm sure. But basically, we try and provide offerings that can kind of demonstrate that teachers are improving at what they do. And I think this is not just unique to teaching. In lots of industries, professional development can be quite sort of, I've sat in one day sort of conferences and stuff, and you thought, why on earth am I here? Yeah. It's like a one day event. And for some reason, we kind of identified in 2017, 2018 that we know a lot about how kids' learning works. And then a lot of that is kind of thrown out the window when it comes to teachers' learning and sort of adults' learning in the workplace. So we wouldn't teach kids GCSE algebra in like a 1.5 day session, for instance, and then expect them to remember it and know it 6 months later for an exam. Yeah, that's kind of routinely the way professional development has gone in schools, because it's easy to get people together, I suppose. But we just thought we can do this a bit better. So our main offering now is it's a subscription product called the Great Teaching Toolkit, and it runs on an annual basis. And we launched it in 2021. And basically, it helps support school improvement by providing like a thorough, evidence-based, data-supported approach to teacher professional development. And it includes courses, tools, resources, all of the things that we know kind of can kind of scaffold professional learning.
Brilliant. So you've created a package service which then is an ongoing, so that they and this is this at their own pace that they can do, or is it specific things that are served then on a frequency or?
Yeah, we I mean, we have our kind of, there's 2 or 3 models that we kind of have seen work really well with schools. So we kind of prescribe a couple of ideas, but we can't know every school's context. So to an extent, it's kind of for them to be flexible within that structure, really. So we say these courses, there's some teacher level ones that are 8 weeks. That might not be actually 8 weeks. It might be sort of spread over, a 16-week term, say. But it's 8 weeks worth of content if you were doing an hour or 2 every week, which sometimes just isn't possible. I think that's the beauty of it, though, the fact that it is flexible, and when school lives are really busy, and you might not get time to get to something for a week, but it's fine. It'll still be there. It'll still be there the next week.
So is it the schools that are your primary customer, or is it the teacher themselves that enrolls and pays?
Yeah, it's mostly the schools or school groups, sort of local authority areas, academy trusts, international school groups even. We do have an individual plan. But I think that's more being used when a teacher really likes what we do and wants to engage, but the school doesn't have budget for, say, 10 or 20 licenses. A teacher might just say, okay, I can afford one, or the school can kind of fund one, whatever it might be.
And are the schools, are they kind of required to do this? Is it part of the ongoing CPD that they have to provide, or are they just choosing to do it because they like what they see?
So I think to an extent there's a requirement for them to have to do professional development of some sort. And, when, particularly for UK state schools here, like when Ofsted come knocking, they will want to see what professional development has looked like, what time is being spent on that, what money is being spent on that. But I think by and large, we want that to be secondary. So the stuff that we do, we try and make it really easy so that when Ofsted do come to the door and say, what have you been doing? A school leader can kind of pull a report of what their staff have been doing within our platform. But I think if that's the reason for people signing up to work with us, that's kind of a little bit of it's backwards almost. I think it's more about the school improvement side of it, and continuing to improve what teachers are doing, even if it's by 1% every term, just kind of gradually shifting the needle on things and improving things in the classroom.
Brilliant. And you mentioned you kind of pretty much pioneered, certainly got the Queen's Award for Enterprise on that innovation of the online side of things. Are you the only option here, really, or who are you competing with? What's the alternatives?
Yeah, it is an interesting one. So I was chatting to another founder of a similar sort of offering, and it's we're not directly competing. And I think that's the case with a lot of offerings in this space, that budgets are tight. So we do have a lot of competition for CPD budgets generally, but we kind of all occupy our own little niche where we do slightly different flavors of things. Yeah. And I think that's fine. I think it's great that those other offerings coexist, and one might focus more on coaching and mentoring, and we might focus more on the courses and the tools side of things, and another might focus on the strategies that you can pick up in the classroom. Right. And I think to that extent, it's what fits in with a particular school's context at their time in their sort of development journey, I guess.
Okay. And roughly how many? I don't have any idea actually. How many schools and how many teachers are there in the country? Are we talking primarily the UK? Are we, that your client base?
Yeah, so in terms of number, mostly UK schools. We do have some international schools, some international school groups, and we've actually worked with, bizarrely, we've worked with local schools in New Zealand, which is the furthest possible point we could be. Yeah. But the sort of story behind that was we were developing this at the very start of COVID, when COVID wasn't a thing there, so their schools were operating as normal. We needed people to test things out, and we sort of had a good partnership or two there. Oh wow! But yeah, in the UK alone, I think there's about 20 to 24,000 schools, depending on what you're counting, and about 600,000 teachers. Obviously, that's a huge part of our market, but it's not the whole thing. We could translate our offering for other contexts as well.
Yeah, so you've got plenty to go for in the UK, but equally from even without translating into different languages, you've got quite a big market that you can go to from English speaking aspect. Yeah, very good. So how do you? This strikes me as a marketplace where you've really got to establish your credibility, and you've obviously done that. You've been taken as a very credible offering. How have you done that? Because you obviously, and people can't see you, but they will know by the fact that you won on Young Entrepreneur of the Year award. You haven't got any grey hairs yet. So how have you established that credibility?
I mean, there's a few coming through, but that's mostly the pressures of running a business, I think. So me personally, I always find this very funny because when we first started, it was mostly Stewart, my co-founder, who delivered a lot of the training. And then he trained me up to deliver some of it. And I would go into schools. And I mean, I still look fairly young now, but this is sort of 6-7 years ago. And it looked like, I mean, some of the year 9 students would have looked older than me. And these teachers would have been sitting in a lecture hall thinking, who's this? Who's this lad who's coming to teach us about assessment data? But I think it's more, so the credibility is not with any one person in particular in our team, which is, I mean, I think it's easy to build something around like a personality who builds a bit of a following and builds a bit of a network. But I think over time, what people have really liked about us, and again, we may have shot ourselves in the foot at a few points saying this, in terms of trying to get a sale, trying to get a school buying into our stuff, but we've kind of acknowledged that there is no silver bullet to this stuff. So in terms of those really sort of slick marketing pitches where you say this is going to improve children's learning by like 6 months here, or this is going to double students learning in a lesson, and I don't think those things exist. And our name's evidence-based education, so we've got to practice what we preach, I think, a little bit. Otherwise, people are going to sort of very quickly start to see through it. But yeah, I think it's the quality of what we do, and people have liked the way we do things over the years, and it's quite hard to build up, and it takes time. And I always want it to happen faster, but just over the years, steadily, I think. Okay,
and you've done things, I think. Though I mean, it sounds like you set up with a co-founder, so Stewart. Yeah. So, and I believe you put an advisory board together, I think, as well, haven't you?
Yeah, we have. So, I mean, that's probably one of those key things, particularly in the early days, in terms of establishing credibility. So we've got some relatively like big names in education academia on that advisory board. And while they're sort of less involved in the day-to-day of what we do, having their sort of, I guess we have their seal of approval, and every year we meet and they sort of hold us to account and make sure that we're adhering to our mission and we're not doing anything that kind of goes against that grain, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's not that we sort of trade on those names particularly, but it's a big trust signal, I think, when sort of schools or when school leaders are looking for something, and then they see Dylan William or John Hattie or Heather Hill there. It's it's a good stamp of approval, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of the product, then, this sounds like is this a platform that you've had to create, a bespoke platform with lots of courses on it? Is that how it looks?
Yeah, it is. So I think the most familiar thing for professional development is courses. So that's kind of what we sort of tend to lead with. But there's also a range of other things in there that we sort of built over time. And I mentioned before that kind of one of the things that are crucial to teaching kids often get forgotten when we're talking about teaching adults and teaching sort of teachers. And one of those things is feedback. So if teachers have no high quality feedback or no sort of objective feedback on their practice, how are they meant to know kind of where to improve and then whether they're improving? So we've built a couple of tools that hopefully help with that. So one's around student evaluation of teaching, which sounds pretty scary, like you're putting your teaching out to students, but it kind of makes sense because for us, like, students are the biggest stakeholder in the quality of teaching, really. It's like they're the ones who see it every day, they're the ones who see it most. And the challenge we had there was kind of in making it like, you don't want it to be like Rate My Teacher, where the students can kind of say anything they like about this teacher who they don't get on with. It's really defined sort of, and it links back to our model for great teaching. So they're very close statements, closed answers. The students can really get to the bottom of pedagogical practice, even though they don't know what they're actually looking for, so to speak. We kind of do that for them. So there's a few bits around that, and then also the sort of structures that need to be in place in a school around sort of school leadership and a supportive environment for staff as well. So school leaders get a bit of feedback on their practice, teachers get some feedback on theirs, and it's a bit like a compass. It sort of points them in a direction that they might want to then explore a bit further with the courses or the resources.
Okay, so does it include subject-based courses as well, or is it all around the sort of more the methodology and leadership side of teaching?
So it's more, mostly generic. And the challenge we've had there, I mentioned the team sort of 16 people. It's just the sort of sheer scale. Once you get into doing subjects and doing for specific curriculum here and there, you very quickly start to build up this vast sort of list of things that you need to tackle. So the way we get around that is it's subject generic for the most part, but then we have examples within each of our courses. And we try and sort of give those in a range of subjects, in a range of phases, so some primary, some secondary, some post-16, and also a range of contexts, like a range of different problems that teachers might be dealing with in the day-to-day and how they might go about solving them. So hopefully that sort of helps bring it to life a little bit rather than it being some very theoretical sort of body of research. Yeah.
And you mentioned the functionality within the platform of being able needing to do the student evaluation feedback. What are the core elements? What does it look like from a teacher's perspective when they enroll and when they go through it? Just help me understand how that looks from a teacher's point of view.
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think a lot of, well, not a lot of teachers, but people who come to our stuff will probably have come because they'll be familiar with our sort of evidence review that we put out called the Great Teaching Toolkit Evidence Review. And that's the sort of basis for all our work.
Okay, so that's another element of thought leadership then, isn't it? And establishing that credibility.
Yeah, and that was 2020. And I think when we put that out, we knew that we had plans for the Great Teaching Toolkit proper, the platform. We didn't know exactly what it was going to look like. And we kind of, maybe naively, we didn't expect people to sort of pick up the evidence review and run with it so quickly. So that was, lovely, and it was great validation for the idea and the principle. With hindsight, we might have waited a little longer to publish the review and then have the platform to follow sooner.
Right.
But it was about a year between the two. When a teacher engages with that, they'll be familiar with our model, which is, we did a massive review of sort of loads of meta-analyses, loads of individual studies on teaching. And we came out with this model of 17 elements that fit into 4 dimensions of great teaching.
Okay.
And people seem to really like that because it's not about reducing teaching to some sort of like very specific things. It's actually about sort of codifying and categorizing it, and it gives this sort of common language, I think, for schools to sort of anchor their offering around and their teacher development. So
for those listening, the meta-analysis, essentially what you've done is you've looked at all the pool of great research out there, and you've analysed that and come up with these conclusions. You haven't necessarily gone out and done lots of your own primary research as such, but you've pulled other people's lessons learnings and really brought it all together across that huge evidence base that then would have been created. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And then the hope is that when teachers use our tools and use the bits and bobs that are in the Great Teaching Toolkit, we can then start to do our own research off that and start to refine what's in there. So the more people use it, the better it gets. Hopefully, that's the principle. But I think one of the premises when Stu and I set this thing up, he was a teacher, school leader, and then an education researcher, and he kind of saw that those dots don't really get joined up. So the research, there's some great research out there, but it doesn't often get communicated to those who are practicing in the classroom. And then those who are practicing in the classroom's views don't necessarily get taken into account when it comes to policy making decisions. And like 3 sort of sides of the triangle don't quite connect sometimes. So hopefully what we do is we sit somewhere in the middle and are able to sort of improve the communication between all 3 of those elements.
And by doing that research and coming up with your dimensions and your elements, that's enabled you to structure then the program, because you can structure around those dimensions and the various elements in between and have a very structured program. Yeah, that's exactly right. And without that, it would be a bit sort of,
we'd be sort of stabbing in the dark as to what we were trying to improve and when. But that gives us a very concrete thing, so that when a teacher puts themselves out for a student survey and gives the survey to the students, what they get is a feedback graph, a chart on those 17 elements basically. So you can quite quickly see, and it's not necessarily like the lowest bar. Every teacher will have some stronger and weaker areas, as will everyone in any walk of life really. But it's just about kind of identifying those things, and you might know 75% of what comes back to you already, but it's where there's those little surprises and where you think, oh, actually, I didn't realize I was a bit weaker on that area. That's where I'm going to dig into next. Right. So that enables that guided prioritization then of, okay, well, this is maybe if I want to be the very best teacher that I can be,
then those one or two areas might be areas I should spend the most time on improving.
Yeah. And I think because teaching is so complicated as well, it's a really difficult profession. And like my wife's a teacher, so I hear that sort of every evening when we're talking about how school's been.
You never get away from it by the sounds of it.
No, I know. Yeah. It is a small world in education. But yeah, so like every class is different as well. So a teacher might do a student survey with one class and then another one a week later, and you might get slightly different results, and they might sort of need slightly different things from you, I guess, to support them at a different stage of their journey. So it's a constant sort of improvement game, really, and you're trying to sort of tweak things here and there for different students.
Fascinating. So what got you into this in the first place then? Take us back to when you started.
The sort of origin stories. So I did nothing to do with education before. My sort of degree was in languages, so I did Chinese and German. And that was, I think, crucially, I liked languages. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I wanted to do something that I was going to enjoy, so that's what I chose. But Stewart, who's my co-founder, I've mentioned already, was my English teacher back at school.
Right.
And we stayed in touch. Like, it was really bizarre. We just had things in common. So we went to the same fitness centre, went to the same gym, went to the Sunderland football matches and sat quite near each other, bizarrely. So we had these random things in common, and we'd go for a curry and a drink and stuff, and keep catching up. And then he was finishing he left teaching and went to do a PhD in education, and he was coming to the end of that at the same time I was finishing my degree. And basically he had a job offer from Durham University to do this sort of work that we were doing, this kind of research to practice sort of gap. And that got pulled, sort of unfortunately, but I guess fortunately for us. And he said, this is my sort of, my PhD's on this sort of thing, on teacher improvement. I think there's a kind of gap here. Shall we just give it a go? And I think he probably would accept me saying, he brings that idea initially, and he's a great sort of communicator, a great person to go and deliver training. What he doesn't have is the sort of organizational admin kind of business skills that I've then developed over time. Yeah. I think we're a good sort of complement to each other in that way.
Great. And how do you get started? Because this is one of those things where, you almost need to have everything ready certainly to a reasonable extent before you can have that credibility to actually get people to use it. And it sounds as if it might be expensive as well from the platform creation aspect. How did you go about that?
Yeah. It's certainly to address your last point first. It is expensive to develop a tech platform. We sort of walked into being a tech business, I think, in sort of one form or another. But we've been self-funded all the way along, and we've sort of grown incrementally, saved a bit, planned for the next development, and then reinvested it. So that's always a fine balancing act, because you think, if I just had X more money here, if I just had 20% more, this is what I'd do. But you can't kind of speed that journey up. You can go out and get investment, and we could have done that earlier. But we felt this was the right sort of route for us at the right time. And I think in the early days, it was partnerships really was the key for us, was acknowledging that we couldn't have the scale from our sort of spare bedroom in Durham. But there are organisations out there who needed what we had at the time, and we could kind of leverage their scale a little bit as well. And it was finding those really good partners. I think in the early days, we worked with Durham University for a while, doing some training for them. And that helped bolster our reputation, I think, in the early days, that we couldn't have done quite as quickly without things like that. Right.
And what about the development of the platform itself and the coding? How did you go about doing that? Yeah, initially we used an external agency to build the sort of MVP, and again, we didn't know that it was going to work, so it was very much a case of let's build what we think is right at the sort of minimum sort of acceptable level, and then let's put it out to people. And we know it's not going to be perfect, but the sort of early adopters will I think be on board with that at being part of a project. And we've got a team in house now, so we've got a product manager, we've got two developers and growing. So we're sort of gradually starting. We're running 2 tracks at the moment. We've still got the external agency that will do some of the sort of bigger, chunkier bits where we're not quite up to speed with yet. Yeah. But we've got a team of 3 and growing.
that are sort of also doing fixes and new developments in-house as well. And I think the balance will just start to shift, and as we grow capacity internally. Again, we couldn't have hired 3-4 people immediately because we didn't have the funding.
Yes.
So it's been a sensible way to go. It's just that those sort of teething problems of sort of running 2 things and bringing stuff in-house from an external. But yeah, that's the way we've done it, and yeah, it's worked okay. I think it's got us to where we needed to be.
Great. So you got 16 people now. How many of those then are kind of in-house like your developers team, and how many are customer facing in terms of maybe helping work with teachers?
Good question. I think so we've got a team of 3 on sales and marketing, which also feels like a small team, but maybe they punch above their weight, I think.
Yeah.
And then we've got an office manager. So yeah, it's probably about half and half. There's probably 7 or 8 who are sort of in-house and on the development or the admin side. And then there's a team of 8 who are education based, and that's either advising our customers and sort of account managing, or on the education research side and the direction of the product, I would say.
Very good. So what are some of the so you got started, you worked out your MVP, you got that up and running, and how did you land your first couple of clients and actually get it going?
With the toolkit, with the new product, you mean?
Well, actually, I'm thinking let's go through the key milestones. Let's because that's obviously a key milestone. But you didn't start there, did you? So what? No. What are some of those milestones then that led you to where you are now?
Yeah. So if I think back, I mean, I was sort of thinking through this before the call. I think so. 2016 was when we partnered with Durham Uni to do some training on their systems. And that was mostly in person. We didn't really have an online offering at that point. So not scalable, but great fun. Like, we'd go and sort of travel around schools in the UK and internationally as well. And the 2 of us would do a bit of a sort of like, we also play in an acoustic duo as well together. So we can't keep away either. But it was like a sort of Stewart and Jack on tour, and it was great fun. Like, we don't do that so much anymore. But I do miss that. So that was probably the first big milestone, I would say. And then the development of our first online course in 2017-18. And for that, I think we'd already built a bit of a reputation, but again, we didn't know how it would go. And we did it sort of cohort based in the first instance. So we had a cohort running in September, I think 2017 it must have been. And we had 60 or 70 schools on that with like 2 or 3 staff each. And it was, right. I think that sort of surpassed our expectations really, because it was something totally new to us and to them probably at the time. Yeah. So yeah, I think in that sense, and we've seen a similar pattern with the toolkit where there was really good uptake at first. And then one of the challenges has been how to sort of keep that interest going and how to sort of keep it fresh and keep it new. So we've always seen like the first cohort or the first group of people will be sort of higher, and then it'll drop down for a couple of months, a few months, and then we pick it back up again. So yeah, I think that's been mirrored, I think, in the Great Teaching Toolkit as well. Okay,
so you started going online, and then was it 2019? Did you say you developed the Great Teaching Toolkit? Or
20? We put the evidence review out in 20, and the toolkit itself launched the following year. So.
Okay, yeah.
So it's still relatively new, really, which I have to keep reminding myself of at times.
Yeah, and the rationale behind both those things then is to try and move away from to try and make it more scalable, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, it's to make it more scalable as a business. I think the other thing with the Great Teaching Toolkit is we genuinely believe and think it will be self-improving as well. So the more people use it, the better it can become, and the more it can help them short circuit that teacher development cycle, I guess, as well. And I think the third aspect of that is it is actually better quality. So there's lots of research out there on effective professional development, and a lot of it says it's sustained and sustainable, over time in increments rather than in one go. So when we used to go out and deliver a day's training here and there, that was just because that was the way the model has always been in schools. And I think actually being out there and kind of saying, okay, this is not what you're used to, and you may have to sort of think differently about how you budget for it and all of that. but it is better. You will see your teachers improving more as a result of a 1 year training plan than you would a 1 day session where you get 40 of your staff all in one room.
And is it a 1 year plan in that it then finishes, or is it just ongoing improvement?
I think the idea is it's ongoing, and generally renewal rates have been really good. We've only been through one cycle of that so far, but we're sort of 75-80% at the minute, which is again like higher than I was kind of expecting.
Yeah.
But I think that's the conversations we're having with schools, and I've been doing some like case study calls, which has been really refreshing actually, because I think when you're managing people in an organization, you see a lot of the problems, and you start, as your team grows, you start to see less of the impact with your customers and with the people who are using it. So doing those calls and getting those renewal sort of figures through has been affirming in that they would very quickly cut it if it wasn't doing what they needed it to. So yeah, that's positive.
Very good. So what are some of the things, it sounds, it's a really, really impressive journey. It sounds like you've made some great strategic decisions. What would you say you've got right so far? What are some of the key things that you think, they've really helped us. We did the right thing there.
Yeah, it's a difficult question. I think there's two that jump out, and one is that bit we touched on before about just the decision making of when's the right time and at what level do we reinvest here. Being sort of bootstrapping all the way and kind of gradually taking on bigger challenges and more development costs, and sort of trusting that the product of that will be good enough to bring in the sales to sort of recoup it in the long term and keep developing to another level. So I think that's been one thing that's been really, really positive. And the second has been the team. Like, I think it may sound a bit trite actually, and like the recruitment of people, but I guess we need quite a specific type of person. We need someone who's been in education ideally, so has seen what's like the lives of teachers are like and how hard it is, and I don't think that's kind of overplaying it. But it's all, I think in a way, that a little bit nerdy. I think Stu and I certainly are, but just really keen to sort of study, keen to kind of learn new things and have that attitude of kind of constantly developing things. And the team we've got now, again, there's been a couple of people that haven't worked out quite so well along the way, but I think that's always going to be the case. And I think what we've done from that is kind of learned, like not to force things, and if someone is not right for the role, then we just kind of take a break, and that's better than sort of putting the square peg in the round hole and trying to sort of force it in over time.
So how do you find good people, and what works for you?
I think it depends a little bit on the role. So the sort of less school-facing sort of roles, like the developers and sort of admin and sales marketing type of people, we've put adverts out in quite a traditional way, I guess, and a couple of them have come through. So our office is based in Sunderland now, and the University of Sunderland has like a graduate internship scheme, which is two of our team, and they're still here now, and they're sort of thriving, have come through that scheme.
Okay.
So that's been really, really good actually, is to sort of, I'm conscious that we're an education focused business and we've got a decent Twitter following, but that's all in schools. So you're not necessarily going to find your back end developer working in a school just by putting a post out. Yeah. But for education focused roles, we have often actually just put social media posts out, and kind of people have shared it. And I think, as I said before, education world is quite small, and it's very, very sort of common where someone will say, "Oh, are you looking for this sort of a person? I know just the type of person." So I think in that way, it's been really powerful, and the sort of the networks of the sort of following that we've kind of built over time have kind of helped us find a few of the team now.
Very good. And you mentioned that they've not all worked out, which we all have, but what would you, what have you learned? What would you say you've learned from that then?
I think the first thing is that bit that I said before about it feels very easy when you're not quite sure after an interview process, you're not quite convinced, but the need is so sort of strong in your head. Like, we need a new role here. We need someone in this position. And I think we've done that a couple of times in the early days where we've just kind of erred on the side of let's just go for it and see how it goes. Yeah, and it'll work out. They'll, you know, the bits that we have doubts on, we'll be able to work them out over time. And you know, it's not always been on their side. It's maybe just not a fit for our organization, not a fit for that type of role. But I think being able to be brave and say, actually, no, whether you sort of like re-recruit for that role, or whether you just sort of take a breath and say, there's no one right for this role right now. That feels like a really hard decision to take at that sort of a moment. But I think I would be more confident to do that now than I was 4 or 5 years ago, for sure.
Brilliant. Good. So a lot right. What would you say maybe with a bit of hindsight you might have done differently?
Okay. That's a good question. I think so. This is a really interesting one, and this comes into focus, I think, more when things are tough. And I think in the last few months, things have been much tougher in education and, well, generally cost of living and all of that. But that's hit school budgets quite hard with the energy bill rises and all of that. So they've been finding budget elsewhere, which has included professional development money to cover energy bill rises and teacher strikes and things like that. But what it's kind of brought into focus, and we've got a non-exec who comes up once a quarter, and it's great for me that those are the best sessions for me, because I don't often get someone who's been there, done it, grown a business to chat to and to kind of learn from. And she kind of, over the last couple of times, she sort of made me think, you know, you could push your team a little bit harder. Like, we've got a very flexible workplace, we've got a really nice environment, we've got a great team, and everyone's very close knit. But actually, sometimes, do you think you can maybe drive them a little bit harder? Like, this is a job at the end of the day, and it's not all of it's going to be fun, just like not all of my job is fun, and I don't enjoy it all. So I think in some respects, I think that's something that I would change if we were starting again, is being a bit firmer, I think, on expectations of the team. I'm a bit of a people pleaser, so I will take on a bit more myself, and maybe to my detriment, you know, I'll do things rather than delegating them, because I think I will do them better or do them faster or whatever it might be.
Brilliant.
So yeah, I think those are the couple of things I would definitely do differently.
Great, good. So how do you make sure that both you but also the rest of your team then are working on the things that are real priorities? How do you go about identifying those things that are priorities that need to be done, and then making sure that they are?
So this is a pertinent question at the minute, because we're just sort of in one of these phases now where September is kind of an arbitrary deadline for us, but it's the start of the school year, so we want to get a lot of new stuff done for September to be ready. And when you feel things drifting a little bit, I think that can be quite hard. You know, sales can be a bit slow for a few months, and then that sort of has a knock-on effect on everyone just feeling a bit lethargic, and everyone's working remotely and on holidays here and there. So what we're doing next week actually is having a bit of a galvanizing week and saying, you know, everyone is going to be in the office for the first time in, you know, goodness knows how long, 3 years. And we're going to just have a bit of an agenda and sort of bottom these things out and kind of say, so if we need to do this by the end of August, what needs to be in place by when in order to be able to achieve those things, and what are we all going to start to do in the rest of this week towards that. And I think that's I'm really looking forward to it, actually, because it like I said, it's been years since we were all in one place for work like that. But yeah, I think other than that, it's the regular monitoring. So again, recently we've put in place like a product board meeting once a month, and that's where the people who are developing and the people who are sort of making decisions on the product. Sales and marketing is the obvious one because the numbers are front and center and they're right there in front of me. It's a bit less obvious for product because that's not my background. So that gives them an opportunity to showcase their work, and me an opportunity to kind of hold them to account on the deadlines they've set, on the sort of plans they've put in place. And I think it's that shifting away from maybe me doing lots of different things and being a bit of a jack of all trades, to kind of me managing the team a little bit better and just kind of ensuring that people have that space to do their work, but then also to feed it back and to kind of know where things are at and keep it on track.
Very good. So what do you you're clearly very passionate about what you do. What do you love most about what you do?
Yeah, good one. I think I just think it's building something. I think
Yeah.
I had no sort of formal business education, or I worked. I did an internship in a corporate in accountancy, but didn't really like that. I kind of wanted to choose the startup, I guess, where you sort of see everything every day, rather than seeing your one bit with a lot of depth. I think I prefer the sort of broader thing. But I think it's knowing that actually that team of 16 people and those costs that we have every month and all of that, like we've kind of built that over time, and that gives me a real sense of satisfaction. And then you have those calls with the schools that we're working with, and you hear from their side that it's working well for them. And I think that just keeps driving you on, really. Without that, it's hard. With that, it makes it all worthwhile.
Yeah, good. And what on the counter side of that, then what frustrates you? What would you want to change if you could?
What frustrates me? I think sometimes, so the team will forgive me for saying this because, like, I've said it to them as well. Sometimes what is most frustrating is when you need to sort of run and push things on, like you're sort of giving momentum. Like, it's been a transition away from a small team where everyone's kind of working on everything, and sort of you're getting your hands dirty and sort of doing all of the day-to-day bits as well.
Yeah.
And we're in that transition point now where the teams are not totally self-sufficient and fully functioning. There's still a lot of decisions that people aren't quite sure that they can make, and they sort of pass it to me, which means at the moment there's a lot of plates spinning, and it feels like I'm being pulled in a lot of directions sometimes. So that's a transition, and that's a sort of, I guess, a big change both for me and for them, that we kind of all need to kind of get on board with, I think.
Yeah, brilliant, good. And what's the legacy you're trying to leave?
I mean, ultimately, we want to be improving the quality of teaching and learning that goes on in every classroom around the world. And whether that's people who've directly engaged with our stuff, or whether it's, us putting research out there and putting in insights from those who are directly engaging that contributes towards that evidence base and education research more broadly. And I think that, it's a noble goal. Everyone kind of understands, I think, the importance of education. I think what people kind of don't necessarily appreciate every day is how hard teaching is and how hard teacher development is.
Yeah.
I think those things, I think if we can even go 10% of the way towards achieving that, I'd be absolutely delighted. I'd retire a very happy person. So
if we're looking at the next 5 years, what has to have happened over those 5 years for you to say, they were successful?
I think it's scaling the number of schools that are directly using the Great Teaching Toolkit for me, and that's, we had these conversations with a big organisation in education, and they said, I've got no doubt you'll get to 300-400 schools. That 400 up to 2,500 is the next step, and that's the hard bit. Feels like it's been pretty hard to get to 400 to me, but I think that will be the big challenge, and whether the sort of systems and processes we've got in place to get to 400 will serve us, or whether we'll have to change something to take that next step, I don't quite know yet. But we'll see. That's the excitement of it.
All right. And what do you think might get in the way of that then? What are the big likely roadblocks or challenges you might face?
I guess part of it is, we talked a bit before about competition, and it's not direct competition, but competition for budget generally is pretty strong. So I think that will, but I think also actually our sales and marketing team, and as a sort of budget, we don't spend a huge amount on outbound sales and marketing. A lot of it's kind of inbound and generated by the content we put out there, or by word of mouth, even in cases. So maybe those things will have to change, and maybe actually it's an acknowledgement that no one in education particularly likes to be sold to, particularly not the sort of the hard sell. But maybe we need to be a bit more out there and sort of proud about our offering, and kind of not be afraid to get the word out there and sort of blow our own trumpet if no one else will.
Yeah, no, very good. Well, it's been absolutely fascinating, and I've got some great insights now that I into your thinking and your journey, but also into the sort of education sector, which has been really, really interesting for me. So thank you for that. Are you all right for a couple of quick fire questions before we close up?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Right.
no problem at all.
So if you could go back to your younger self, maybe when you first were starting the business, what would your advice be?
I would say, like, back yourself a little bit more.
Okay.
I think there are lots of moments of self-doubt along the way, and that probably goes even beyond starting the business. For me, I think as a sort of younger person, I was sort of a bit of a worrier, maybe. So yeah, I think trust the decision-making process that kind of, with hindsight, has served us really well and has served me really well. So yeah, have a bit of faith in that.
Very good. Are you a reader or a listener to podcasts, or any that you would recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, ScaleUp Radio, of course. But yeah, so podcasts I tend to listen to a little bit more for sort of entertainment. So try to sort of get out of the workspace normally. But reading, I'm enjoying sort of reading and kind of learning from. You can see behind me the bookshelf. There's a fair bit of non-fiction and sort of business literature there. And the one I'm reading at the moment is really good. Build by Tony Fadell.
Okay.
Who was helped build the iPod and then subsequently Nest, the sort of learning thermostats, and sold that to Google. I like those sort of practical books where they sort of tell you a little bit about the key things that they've learned along the way, in quite a sort of concise way, sort of through sort of anecdotes, and that's been really good so far. I'm only halfway through it, so it might change, but I doubt it.
Excellent. Thank you very much. What apps or bits of technology have you found to be particularly useful?
Oh, so one that's quite recent. I mean, I'm a bit of an analog person, so I like my notebook and pen. Yep. But I have used OneNote, and I think that's really, really powerful. Actually, for sort of collaboration, for list making, for sort of planning. But I think one that has really helped me as a sort of, like, on the finance side is a tool called Fathom, and it's I don't know if you've come across it before, but for sort of forecasting and management reporting against your finances, and I hadn't really put a lot of time into set it up, for the first few months, and then I did, and then I realized, actually, this is really really useful to be able to sort of put variables in, and if we take on another person here, what's the impact on cash flow 4 months down the line, sort of thing. Okay. That's been really nice. It's been really helpful for me. Yeah,
very good. And who do you look up to? Who's had the most influence on you as a business leader?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I think I draw influences from like a lot of different areas, really. I think so. Yeah. Obviously, like my dad is the sort of the obvious answer. He was in business for quite a while when I was a bit younger, and he's still a great sounding board now. But I talked about non-exec, who sort of helps with our business. I was in touch with her from before we started EBE. I used to do proofreading and translating. And she's an inspirational person, I would say, and it's so impressive what she achieved in the sort of 10 years before we set up. But then from other spheres, I think you can learn a lot from sort of. I'm a big into my sports, so yeah, big sort of cricket and football fan, and there's lots of people you can kind of draw parallels from, maybe some less directly than others. But yeah, I think sort of drawing lots of inspirations in lots of ways from different places.
How is Sunderland doing, by the way?
It's been a bit of a tremendous season, really. After 4 or 5 difficult years, so in the playoff semi-final, they won the first leg against Luton just at the weekend. Yeah. So they may or may not get to Wembley at the time of recording, but could be back-to-back promotions if they do. So we'll see.
Brilliant, good. All right, and last question around the marketing side. You've already hinted a little bit about what works for you, but what are your most successful ways of finding more customers?
Yeah, it is difficult because you'll have got from this, we've been talking for nearly an hour, and it's a complex product. It's not something that you can kind of sell in a flyer with three bullet points. So it is difficult, and it's about sort of multiple touch points and sort of heavy on the inbound side of things. So Alex, who's in charge of our marketing, he uses we use HubSpot's the CRM that we use, and he's developed it to such a sort of an advanced kind of way with automations and workflows and things like that. So it feels like it does the work of about 5 people, and I think that it's sort of funneling people through. And I guess for some businesses that sort of lead generation to sale process can be a couple of weeks. For us, we just had one last week actually that sort of dropped through as a sale, and they'd been in the pipeline for nearly 2 years. So it's sort of drip feeding content over time that people find useful, and just interspersing that with like platform demos, case studies. I think we need to shorten that sort of lead time. Hopefully, that would be the ideal. If we can get that down to a few months, that would be great. But yeah, that's worked well for us.
Excellent, really good. Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, Jack. So thank you very much for that. If people would like to get hold of you or find out more about the business, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, Jack Deverson, and then just email. I'm very happy to, I sort of go into schools in the region and do sort of enterprise advisor type work, and I'm always happy to chat to people and learn. I think in the same way that you are, learn about other businesses and learn what's working for people in other sectors as well. So just emailing me as well, jack@evidencebased.education, and I'm very happy to chat to anyone.
Fantastic. Jack, thank you very much indeed for being my guest today.
Thanks so much, Kevin. It's been a pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed that discussion, and if you're building and scaling your own business, you might well be interested in our book, The Entrepreneurial Scale-Up System. And it's exactly what it says on the tin. It's a practical handbook around scaling a business in a structured way. And you can order a copy on all your favorite online retailers, including an audio version, or you can find it and other supporting resources on our website, www.esusgroup.co.uk. That's esusgroup.co.uk, which is esusgroup.co.uk.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.